Thanks everyone for coming. I know this was a fairly short notice, but once again we try and get this information to you as quickly as we can and yet have accurate information for you. If you have not read the press release, there's multiple copies on the table there. Shortly before 3 a.m. this morning, officers were sent to the report of a domestic matter at 1618 Mole Avenue in Janesville, with both husband and wife reportedly stabbed. Upon arrival, officers met with the husband, Carl Rowan, age 32, outside of his home. Mr. Rowan reported that his wife, Holly Rowan, age 31, was inside the home and found Mrs. Rowan, may have had a handgun. Officers entered the home and found Mrs. Rowan dead from an apparent gunshot wound. The investigation reveals that earlier in the morning, Mr. and Mrs. Rowan had a domestic dispute. During the dispute, Mrs. Rowan allegedly stabbed Mr. Rowan in the hand. Mrs. Rowan then stabbed herself in the arm. Mr. Rowan dialed 911 and reported the matter to the Rock County Communications Center. In the 911 call, Mrs. Rowan can be heard arguing with Mr. Rowan. During this continuous, and that's important, continuous 911 call, Mr. Rowan left the home and met with officers down the street from the home. Officers can then be heard in this 911 tape talking with Mr. Rowan upon their arrival. Mrs. Rowan apparently suffered a fatal self-inflicted gunshot wound after Mr. Rowan left the home and before officers entered the home. No one heard the sound of a gunshot. An autopsy of Mrs. Rowan is scheduled for tomorrow. Mr. Rowan is a trooper with the Wisconsin State Patrol. He's assigned to the Southwest Region DeForest Post. He was off duty during this time. Trooper Rowan has been with the Wisconsin State Patrol since 2002 and is in good standing with their employ with the State Patrol. On behalf of the Janesville Police Department, I'd like to extend our concerns to the Rowan family regarding this tragic event. And I would like to interview two people that are up here with me. To my right is Angela Moore, and she is with the YWCA. The YWCA partners with us for our domestic violence efforts in our community here. And to my left is Officer Rod Hirsch. He's a member of our domestic violence intervention team. I would like to answer questions at this point, and then after the questions are complete, Ms. Moore has some information about domestic violence. Any questions?
Is the reason you kind of called this press conference to make sure that the people know that there was a continuous phone call and that this isn't a cover-up for Janesville PD kind of watching their trooper buddies back? Right.
These types of incidents certainly could cause much speculation, and it could question the integrity of the Janesville Police Department and the integrity of the Wisconsin State Patrol. And it's for that reason we wanted to be very open and transparent about the investigation and really the conclusive information that shows that Trooper Rowan was not involved with the gunshot wound and death of his wife, and that actually, absent the death of Mrs. Rowan, she would have been arrested for domestic violence.
Could you confirm that the couple had a child, and if they do, where is he right now?
I certainly will not talk about where those children are. I can tell you that they have two children. There were three children in the home, two of the Rowans and another extended family member, and I can tell you that we have seen fit to see that the children are cared for, as well as Mr. Rowan.
Was the gun used also a property of the State Patrol?
It was not. It was not.
What kind of a weapon was it?
It was a .357 revolver.
And
Mr. Rowan had bought it for Mrs. Rowan for her own protection. Some period of time ago, not recently.
kind of knife was used? A kitchen knife or?
I know it came from the kitchen, I don't know the type of knife.
How long was he on the phone?
6 minutes and 31 seconds.
Were there any ongoing conflicts or anything that your department knew about? Was this a couple you were familiar with?
Yeah, we were not. And we had no calls for service to the home, no indication of domestic violence at the home. As we interviewed Mr. Rowan and the children, we understand that there had been some conflicts, not terribly alarming, but some conflicts over the years.
Do you know what the argument or dispute was about last night?
I can tell you that it involved, in part, one of the children.
One of their children or the?
Well, there is one child that is from the marriage of the two, and I think another child is not from this marriage, so I'm not sure which child it was.
Do you know if Mrs. Rowan was being treated for any kind of mental condition or was on medication for that?
I'm not aware of that at all.
How serious was the stab wound to Mr. Rowan?
It was in his hand, and he was treated with 8 stitches. So I would categorize it as not serious.
Do you know if Mr. Rowan was a Janesville native? He grew up here?
I do not know.
Has he been placed in leave because of this, or is he an active officer right now?
Up until this morning, he was an active officer. I don't know his status, and I've not spoken to the State Patrol about this, but just from an employer standpoint, I think Mr. Rowan needs time to heal.
So, is he out on his own recognizance now, or is he being spoken to now, or where is he now?
Mr. Rowan?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'll make it very clear, Mr. Rowan was a victim of domestic violence, so there would be no reason for us to hold him or have any type of bail on that type of issue. But Mr. Rowan was a victim.
Tell me from a law enforcement perspective, how concerning are these calls? Because oftentimes there's situations that officers have no idea what they're getting into. Is it something that is concerning from someone responding to a situation like that?
All domestic violence calls are concerning to us, and that's why we put much of our resources into domestic violence issues. This, of course, was concerning because in the beginning we had 2 persons, husband and wife, that were stabbed. So we knew there was a violent situation going in. When the officers arrived, the information was shared that there may be a handgun inside. That makes it even more concerning for the officers. But we also knew that Mrs. Rowan was stabbed in the arm and was bleeding, and that causes us to get into the home rather quickly to check on her welfare. So although there was a weapon in the home, there was some exigency that we get in there quickly to make sure that she's okay. And of course, the end result was far more tragic than just that self-inflicted stab wound.
Where, how far away from the house was Mr. Rowan when the officers came up on him?
About a half block. He had left the home and was walking towards where the officers had parked, which of course was not right in front of the home, and he walked towards the officers to meet with them to discuss the matter. No one heard a gunshot. Mr. Rowan, the officers, the children in the home were not awoken.
But there was a gunshot, obviously, and that's the
There
cause
was.
of death, as far as you know.
Preliminarily, yes, it was quite apparent to the investigators. I can tell you that the details of the scene were consistent with a suicide. And we have had some discussions as to why no one heard that shot, and there were some unique characteristics of the bedroom in which she was found. It was carpeted, it was next to a bed. Mr. Rowan works third shift, so he had rather thick double drapes, which would cause the sound to be less. The body was low at the time that the shot occurred. It was a contact wound, which would minimize the report or the sound of the weapon. So collectively, that would be, and also with the house being closed, we think that minimized the sound that was certainly outside the home and probably inside the home as well.
When you say contact wound, do you mean it was, the barrel was pressed to the person?
Yes.
Did the husband ever indicate if this is not the first time she attempted suicide?
There had been threats of suicide in the past, nothing recently. It's been a number of months, but the threats did involve a weapon.
It did involve a weapon?
It did, yeah, threats of suicide involved a weapon, yes.
It did. You just, would you be able to describe what type of weapon it was? Even if it's not detailed, was it a gun?
It was a handgun, .357.
Same one?
Yes. Okay, we'll answer some more questions, but I'd like to share that domestic violence touches all parts of our community, all professions, all walks of life. At JPD, we have an outreach program with our domestic violence team, but much of that work is done after the domestic violence is reported to us. In this case, we never got the call ahead of time, and we never had that chance to intervene. And with us here is Angela Moore with the YWCA, and she can talk a little bit about some of the support systems and opportunities that are available in our community for domestic violence. And of course, our hope is that these issues can be addressed before these tragic circumstances occur. Angela.
Thank you, Chief Moore. This morning's incident is totally tragic for the family and the community. And we did look back at statistics, sadly, in Wisconsin. The most recent statistics available were for 2011 and 12. There were 89 domestic violence deaths in Wisconsin alone during that period. And Rock County had 3 domestic violence deaths during that time. And at the YWCA, we provide services to victims of domestic violence. We provide a 24-hour helpline. We have a 33-bed emergency domestic violence shelter for women and children. We provide legal advocacy, including restraining orders for our clients, and support groups for families and their children, including case management, safety planning, health and mental health care referrals, and medical care as needed. This year alone, through May, we provided 3,188 shelter nights, and we've handled 45 cases of domestic violence intervention, and that's at our shelter alone, and provided legal advocacy assistance for 34 cases revolving domestic violence. This is truly a systemic issue that affects everyone in the community, including the family.
Angela, can you please spell your name one time to make sure I have it right?
Angela Moore. I'm no relationship to Chief Moore, just so that you know that. I'm the Executive Director of the YWCA of Rock County.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Moore, I don't know if you want to, but can you say anything about what might have happened, what might have been done in this situation? Could someone have done something differently, or is it hard to say?
It's difficult to say. Of course, we can never confirm nor deny if someone is a client or receives services from us for obvious reasons, but it is difficult to say. Every domestic violence situation and incident is unique, and to know the dynamics in that household and what might have prevented it or how intervention may have helped is almost impossible to speculate at this point.
Okay, if there's no further questions, again, you have the press releases here. Again, we'd like to extend our concerns to the Rowan family on this tragic event. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Chief.